Hey there, OWP. Just saw your video about, responding to, I guess, the question, why is religion and atheism such an addictive topic to discuss? And I just thought I'd weigh in a little bit about this. First and foremost, I would say the relative anonymity of YouTube, since I think it's a fairly small proportion of people who actually show their face on here and use their real name and stuff like that, gives people a comfort level of talking about these things that they wouldn't have otherwise. I think also because, most of us are in self-selected communities. We're in a place where we know we're talking with a lot of people who are sympathetic, especially, like, for example, if you make it your business to talk about atheism, pretty much exclusively. And certainly I'm subscribed to several channels where atheism is pretty much their main business. They're not really talking about much of anything else. So you have that aspect of it too. But in terms of, like, why is it such an addictive topic to talk about? I think it's really interesting. I think the whole kind of prohibition, because I heard that phrase many times, frequently from older people, but I mean, even occasionally, from my parents, talking about it as sort of a truism, that I guess it's always kind of been the conventional wisdom that it's safer not to talk about politics or religion. And when you think about it, there are a lot of places in the world where your relatives are from is one of the primary ones where a religious debate can end with somebody's throat being cut. So it's just it's not just that it could be dangerous, and in some places, I mean, it's genuinely life threatening, to have these discussions. Um, so that's another aspect to it, and aside from that, there was a point where I was actually trying to find an old letter that I had written on Salon, and basically. The whole point of the letter was trying to kind of explain the arrogance that both sides of the religious debate bring to their various sides. Um, and I put it very succinctly in this letter because I worked really hard on it. But I couldn't find it. I think it's been removed from the archives or whatever. Um, but what I was saying in that letter, and I'm going to put it poorly now, it's because I'm not going to write the letter over again, um, is that there's kind of an inherent arrogance in both sides of this. And I mean, I think it's completely unavoidable. Um, if you're a religious person and you're talking with somebody who's a non-believer, well, I mean, pretty much every religion has a punishment set up for non-believers, and I mean, I think it's almost always a franchise of evil. It's not like you can be an atheist and get into whatever version of heaven there is. So, at the end of the day, the religious person who's talking to a sincerely committed atheist is believing that person is going to whatever their version of hell is. And I mean, how much respect can you honestly generate for someone who you if you believe in your religion, you think that person is going to hell or going to some other place, besides where you're going. Um, I mean, for most people, that's the whole point. That their religious figure is some sort of judge of over the goodness of your life, and some aspect of the goodness of your life is always whether or not you believe in the person doing the judging. That's kind of like rule one. If you don't believe in the person who's doing the judging, well, then you're kind of instantly disqualified. Um, on the other hand, people coming from my side of the table are coming out of this logical rationalist framework, and we're just applying the same kind of intellectual tools to the proposition of religion that we do to anything else. And honestly, I mean, this makes religions look silly to us and people who believe in them. Um, you know, there's a certain part of me that always, deeply wonders about someone who's a committed Christian, and how they got to this belief. Because I mean, I studied all the world's religions. I mean, there are probably, a whole bunch of really obscure ones that I never got to. But I mean, when I was a young kid, I made a committed determination to try to find out about, a bunch of religions. I mean, I remember as a little kid, like, going to a Greek Orthodox church in Atlanta, Georgia. And reading, checking out books. And I mean, the librarian would be looking at me. He's like, "You really want these books?" "Yeah, I really want these books," because it was a terribly important thing for me to try to figure out at the time. So when you get to the point of like, putting these things through their tests, and trying to figure out whether they make logical sense or not, whether they're practical, reasonable, whether the statements that they make about the world around us, whether those are accurate or not. And even aside from that, there's two different ways, I think, really to do it. You can go at it from that framework, or you can even go at it, in the case of almost all of them, from like a moral standpoint, and say whether they are morally correct or not. And clearly, for example, if the Bible is to be, the absolute revealed Word of God, I would expect no moral errors in it whatsoever. And yet, you have these horrific stories, which are essentially indefensible. Like the guy who is greeted by an angry mob who's after his house guest, who offers his wife to be raped instead of his house guest. I mean, that's in the Bible. And to me, coming from, like, once again, a rationalist point of view, I think, okay, if this is the revealed Word of God, why does he suffer that story to be in there? And it also gets back to, like, the conclusion that I drew. So I can't even remember the exact day. It was either when I was 13 or 14, which is when I became an atheist. And then I looked at all of the religions in the world, and I said, if there is a God, why would he allow there to be confusion about what the rules are? I mean, there's clearly one right way to get into heaven. And so, wouldn't he make sure that everybody's at least kind of going with the same rule book? That they would have the ability to compete fairly. I mean, assuming God is at all into fairness, which, one would hope he would be, or she, or it, or whatever. Don't want to insult anybody. So anyway, I just thought there was, like, basically going to be a whole lot of arrogance on both sides. I mean, a religious person thinks I'm going to hell at the end of the day, and, I think they believe in ridiculous fairy tales. So there's just not a whole lot of respect to be had there. And honestly, one of us is right. When we're dead, either something happens or something doesn't. And yeah, we're never going to get the answer. So, I mean, I guess to a certain extent, all of the argument is futile. But I mean, I think the attitude you have affects the way that you live your life. And so it is relevant to discuss these things before we die. Because I think actually religion is terribly dangerous. Now, as far as politics is concerned, I didn't even really get into that because, of course, we have to discuss politics. And I shock people out of their comfort zone on this all the time. And I think it's necessary. I think we have to do that because our system is sick. And if we just kind of shut up about it all the time, it's just going to keep being sick and getting sicker. And I don't know. If it dies, I guess I'm not even sure if that would be a bad thing, except that we're going to do it in an uncontrolled, haphazard fashion in which we're all going to get ripped off, instead of doing it in a controlled way in which maybe we can control the way that we fall. Well, man, I think this video is too long. It was a good video, and everyone, you can feel free to argue.